British Columbians are rushing across the border to fill up on cheap gas. So today I think it's a good time to point out some of the hypocrisy of the two leaders involved in this whole mess: Washington Governor Jay Inslee and British Columbia's NDP Premier John Horgan. Now, according to Canadian law, you can bring about 6 jerry cans or 150 kilograms of gas across the border from the United States before you fall under those federal laws regulating the transportation of dangerous goods. And holy moly, are British Columbians in the Lower Mainland ever taking advantage of that exemption? This is from a Vancouver Sun article. It quotes a worker at a Shell gas station in Blaine, Washington, who says she estimates that more than half of the customers from Canada who come to her gas station are filling up jerry cans when they come in for a fill. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into Washington state fuel being more affordable than British Columbia's price, but one of the variables is taxes. You see, Washington state voters have repeatedly rejected a carbon tax when given the choice at the ballot box, which is, of course, something Canadians living under carbon tax oppression have never received, like a say in the taxes they're charged. Canadian motorists are now flooding across the border to haul gas back to Canada, even though Canada has the world's third largest proven oil reserves. It's ridiculous, and it's due in part to people like Washington State Governor Jay Inslee, who has repeatedly tried to intervene against Canada's ability to get its oil and gas, not only to BC's Lower Mainland, where they could do with an increased supply, but also offshore to foreign markets. Inslee condemned the NEB's recommendation that the Trans Mountain Pipeline go forward, while a makeshift pipeline, just in jerry cans, forms in the trunks of Canadian cars. Imported oil and gas only makes up about 10% of BC's fuel, but I suspect Inslee would love to see that go higher. Democrat Inslee isn't against gasoline. I mean, that's pretty clear. He has a refinery of his own in Cherry Point, Washington, and he's certainly not against selling gasoline to Canadians who are avoiding a carbon tax back home. Inslee's never said a word against Canadians driving across the border to fill up their gas tanks and, of course, now their jerry cans. Inslee just wants Canadians to be forced to use more of Inslee's Washington State gasoline, while Alberta languishes on the other side of the Rockies. Maybe the J in Jay Inslee is short for Jerry Can Inslee because his foreign meddling in the Canadian economy is doing a lot more for the sale of those red gas canisters than anything I can think of. Shameless hypocrite Inslee is still obsessing about Trump being impeached because of some unproven Russia-Trump collusion conspiracy theory, but it is Inslee who is the foreign meddler here, seeking to influence Canadian domestic policy and thus landlock Alberta oil and gas to the benefit of his state. And if Putin did such an obscene thing to the benefit of Gazprom, Democrats like Inslee would be starting their hair on fire over it by, rubbing two sticks together, I presume. But hypocrisy is really the theme of the Trans Mountain opposition, coming from these far left-wing men in charge of the West Coast, both in Canada and the United States. Let's talk about NDP Premier John Horgan and the cruise ship industry in British Columbia's Lower Mainland for a second. Now look, I don't have a problem with the cruise ship industry. I know it employs a lot of people and it brings in a lot of tourism dollars to Vancouver. That's a good thing. But I'm also not worried about port traffic annoying all the orcas and causing catastrophic destruction in the Pacific Ocean. From what I understand, the BC NDP are, at least that's the excuse they always fall back on when expressing opposition to Trans Mountain. That and, of course, climate change, while being North America's largest exporter of coal. The BC government loves to brag that 1 million people per year are coming to Vancouver on cruise ships. In fact, this year, 2019, it's celebrated to be one of the largest years for the cruise ship industry in a long, long time. Just look at this Port of Vancouver press release from about a week ago. More than 1 million cruise passengers on 290 ship visits are expected in Vancouver this year, which is a 21% increase in passenger numbers compared to 2018 and will mark an all-time record for cruise passengers through Canada Place at the Port of Vancouver. It's actually been so busy in the Port of Vancouver with all these cruise ships coming and going that 2 of them collided just a couple of weeks ago. And here I thought tanker traffic was the problem in the port. Now, no one is calling for a ban on cruise ships to protect the port, but those floating cities could do catastrophic ecological damage if one of them got damaged enough to go down in the port. And earlier this year, that same BC NDP Premier John Horgan's government approved the reinstatement of 2,700 round-trip sailings per year on 10 ferry routes that were cut by the former BC Liberal government back in 2014. 27 extra round-trip sailings, so 5,400 single sailings. Do you know how many extra tankers per day would be added to the Port of Vancouver by the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion? 1. And that's according to former Natural Resources Liberal Minister Jim Carr. So at the very worst, some extra 365 tankers per year. So 5,400 extra individual ferry sailings will not annoy the orcas. The nearly 300 cruise ship liners are just going to drift into town and not cause a ripple in the ocean. But 300 and some odd tanker ships are going to kill all the orcas? Do I have that right? For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Hey, have you checked out some of my friend and colleague Cian Bexty's latest reporting? You can do that right now at rebelinvestigates.com. You see, Cian's got a new role here at the Rebel. He's a roving reporter, and he's going wherever the news takes him. He's been to San Diego to cover the synagogue shooting. He's been to Winnipeg to cover a fake hate crime. He's even been to Panama City to cover a Trump rally. But sending Cian to all these places, it's valuable work, but it's also very expensive. If you can help pitch in to cover the cost to bring you the other side of the story from all across North America, you can do that too at rebelinvestigates.com.